I'm Non-Zero Sum James, your companion on this exploration of win-win games. We don't just let people die. So what next? This is a speculative post that explores the implications for a society like ours that has, thankfully, decided not to allow citizens to die needlessly from starvation and poverty. But do we stop there? If we only ensure a bare minimum for society, leaving people in dire poverty, are we stifling their potential to contribute? This post seeks a non-zero-sum solution that combines compassion with pragmatism. Capitalism and evolution. According to Adam Smith, a society should operate in a way so as to provide not only the commodities which are indispensably necessary for the support of life, but whatever the custom of the country renders it indecent for creditable people to be without. Adam Smith. It was not only unacceptable to Smith to allow people to perish, but also to deny them what they need to live with dignity. But on that second point, there have been differing levels of concern about the least fortunate. The incentives created by economic inequality, with rewards for education, hard work, and risk-taking, are essential for creating a dynamic, innovative economy. Gary Becker, Nobel Prize-winning economist. Becker credits inequality as being the driving force behind an innovative economy. Some will reference an evolutionary mode, survival of the fittest, to justify an unsympathetic attitude to those unable to support themselves. While the law of competition may be sometimes hard for the individual, it is best for the race because it ensures the survival of the fittest in every department. Andrew Carnegie. I will argue it is optimal to have people afforded a greater than subsistence level of existence. The Red Queen. In Alice in Wonderland, the Red Queen is riding her horse through a forest. But as she rides, the trees and all the creatures of the forest are moving in the same direction, at the same speed. So she appears to stand still. This concept, that Matt Ridley refers to as the Red Queen, is something that is evident in evolutionary arms races. There are arms races in nature which create selection pressures that build incredible strength in both parties. The rough-skinned newt, for instance, is one of the most toxic animals on the planet, and produces enough toxin to kill several humans, yet the common garter snake eats them without difficulty. That's because these two species have evolved alongside each other. As the newt evolved a more and more powerful poison, the snake developed a greater and greater tolerance. Like with the Red Queen, relative to each other, the newt and the snake seem to be stationary. It is only once we step outside of the forest that we notice they are in fact moving. When a happy-go-lucky dog catches the newt, we see the product of this evolutionary arms race, tetrodotoxin, one of the most potent neurotoxins on Earth, coming into tragic conflict with the unfortunate dog. An externality, something we'll cover later. Pros and cons of competition. Competition, in the form of free market capitalism, contains a number of self-balancing subsystems that appear to magically do the work of Adam Smith's invisible hand. This self-interested system has, counterintuitively, succeeded in stimulating progress and increasing the well-being of populations around the world. Competition can also produce in us strengths that might have remained dormant were we never to compete. Competition in our markets drives down prices, forces efficiencies, and can, given the right parameters, drive innovation. But competition can also create poison. Externalities. While many of capitalism's subsystems do self-balance, on the whole we can observe this is not an absolute rule. The poison of inequality within capitalist societies is growing, though it's worth pointing out that global inequality is decreasing. Income inequality is an externality to the standard measure of economic prosperity, gross domestic product, GDP. And so income inequality and other externalities, such as social well-being and the environment, also suffer enormous consequences. The economic poison of national income inequality is coming into conflict with the external world in the form of the fracturing of society. Just evolve. In the wild, the unfortunate externalities would die, and the gene pool would adapt. People in poverty would die, and the system would balance once again. Now we no longer live in a world of the survival of the fittest, and yet The COVID-19 pandemic showed us that when it has come to the health of the economy, even normally liberal and ostensibly caring people were sometimes willing to compromise on the social norm of not letting people die. But in general, we don't just let people die. And so I think it's important to note that politics, economics, and the work that we take part in are all instrumental activities in service of the ultimate goal of well-being. And people needlessly dying doesn't help that ultimate goal for either the unfortunate who die or the grieving souls left behind. So if the answer to the question, can we just leave people in poverty to die, is no, then a lot follows from that answer. Restoring balance with a vengeance. We are living in a very different state from that of our evolutionary past. While competitive systems usually self-balance through atrophy, ours will not. Therefore, that avenue for self-balancing needs to be replaced, otherwise it will return with a vengeance. When human systems in the past have fallen out of balance, they have restored equilibrium through war, mass death. In the wider frame, when the environment gets out of kilter, its reaction is often extreme and irreversible. Extinction. Death with a vengeance. So, we have a two-part question. What is the most cost-effective way of keeping everyone alive? How do we maintain balance in society and the environment? Keeping everyone alive. It might seem as though just providing a subsistence survival budget for those who are unable to support themselves would be cheapest, and would allow the magic of the market to continue creating the wealth, however unevenly distributed. But there's an issue with that. The peasants are revolting. This approach is negated by the threat of revolt. With continued inequality within a society, a base of desperate people has in the past eventually led to terrorism and revolution. So, is there a satisfactory point where the safety net is just enough to curb revolt? Not if the gap between rich and poor is widening. You will eventually only have rich and poor, and the poor will far outnumber the rich. So, is it hopeless? Are we destined for war and revolt? Let's look at this situation at present. There's one option, which is what we have at present, where the very rich can protect their wealth by employing lawyers, accountants, real estate brokers, advertisers, and wealth managers. They are then able to leverage capital for political influence by making donations, hiring lobbyists, and controlling the narrative by buying media organizations. Perversely, this is a form of wealth distribution, but it is one completely controlled by the wealthiest, essentially twisting the taps to the minimum required to keep their reservoir full. This is the scenario we see play out. People being trapped in poverty, being convinced of untruths in the media, and voting against their own best interests. To be clear, this is not something necessarily conspiratorial. It is simply the result of a system that encourages a zero-sum mentality around prosperity. And yet, the costs of this charade are enormous. All of this money being spent on distributing misinformation and political manipulation is an unproductive, negative-sum game, with the gains going to very few people who get diminishing benefits for their well-being from the additional billions on top of the billions they already have. But capitalism gave us all this stuff. The narrative put forward by pro-capitalist media companies feeds back into itself, entrenching the claim that the free market creates wealth and commerce, and therefore every life-improving technology is somehow a product of the market, when that is simply not true. Actually, you have the government to thank for your smartphone and much else. All of the essential technology that goes into your smartphone was developed by a government agency, generally the US government through NASA and the CIA. Microchips, touchscreens, the accelerometer, voice recognition, the internet. In fact, one could argue that given that the market benefits from capitalizing on any incremental improvement on a given technology, it is actually a market prerogative to slow the growth of technology to that end. Why release a phone with 5 new features when you can just R&D one and put it in a new case? This gives us reason to be a little skeptical with claims about how much the market has given us, despite its self-serving ideology. Greed is good. Your intuitions might be correct. The idea that competition, or even greed, is good is counterintuitive for good reason. Our intuitions tell us that competition always comes at a cost, which is why we generally avoid conflict most of the time, and cooperate when we can. And while the costs of the competition of the market are almost invisible, they are becoming increasingly evident when we look at the negative impacts on the environment and on society. Solutions. There is a workable solution that avoids revolution, terrorism, and war that doesn't also require so much wasted time and resources to maintain through some meaningless charade like we have at present. But before we get to it, it is important to look at some of the other hidden costs to doing the bare minimum. The expensive, cheapest option. It is a fact that living in poverty lowers opportunity, motivation, and even intelligence. So, doing the bare minimum, we are actually taking human potential out of the system, resulting in freeloaders at the top, avoiding tax and hoarding capital, and freeloaders at the bottom, becoming a drain on the economy, health services, the legal system, and prisons. This is extremely expensive. Now, I don't want to get lost in the idea that people are only worth what they are able to produce. I want to acknowledge that people contribute in diverse ways to a culturally rich society, and I'm not suggesting that people without the means to contribute to the economy are not valuable members of society. On to the next point. A satisficing plan. We've already decided that we can't let people die and want to make the most out of the potential of each human so that they are at optimal motivation, intelligence, and productivity for themselves and society. We are then left with two problems: how to stop national inequality growing and how to pay for it. Now, this is not something new, universal basic income. But hear me out. A UBI streamlines the process of not letting people die, eliminates poverty traps, and reduces stigma because it is afforded to everyone. It also incentivizes the creation of quality jobs by reducing the demand for jobs, giving workers more choice to do something meaningful with their lives. A UBI is also not just a leftist policy. It has bipartisan support because it can reduce red tape and bureaucracy, and even eliminate the necessity for things like a minimum wage, meaning that non-profit or low-profit businesses could provide lower paid but meaningful work for people based on values they hold dear, rather than purely for the value of a paycheck. The logic of universal basic income is that it provides a financial foundation that allows free citizens to build upon. This goes some way towards leveling the playing field. But there is another dimension in which the playing field is uneven, and that's in childhood. A gilded childhood. My friend and guest writer on the blog, Andrew, makes a case that we should focus on the foundation of childhood through direct investment in children, through free schools, childcare, healthcare, meals, and wraparound care, to level out and level up the upbringing experience. And I agree with him. This two-dimensional approach to providing a solid foundation goes some way to addressing the coordination problem of inequality and poverty by plugging a number of the inequality holes. Ideally, this means that we have well-adjusted adults with the capacity to take advantage of a more free and dynamic society without the burden of childhood disadvantages or financial insecurity. Now, both of these options seem very expensive, but there are already massive costs to do with poverty, which will be saved by lifting people out of poverty so they can contribute to society. The unsexy payment plan. The rest of the way is simple. As Rutger Bregman says, taxes, taxes, taxes. Boring, I know. But with new, better structured taxes, it will be possible to erode wealth at the very top to pay for a UBI that lifts everyone to a point where they can make decisions about their future from a position of security. Land and inheritance tax. Currently, the very wealthy can use their money to generate more wealth without the need for productivity. They are incentivized to divest from funding new businesses and innovation in favor of safer, high-return static assets, such as real estate. Thomas Piketty suggests that taxing capital will not only reduce wealth inequality within capitalist societies, but also incentivize investment back into the working economy, a healthy form of tax avoidance. Destination-based corporate tax. Generally, companies pay tax where their offices are based, which enables multinational companies to utilize tax havens. If tax were paid in the country where products were bought rather than where they were made, this sort of tax avoidance would be much more difficult. But what about the rich? For those of you who feel sorry for the rich, they will still be rich. but they will be incentivized to move their wealth into the innovation economy, spurring on young entrepreneurs to come up with new solutions to the problems we face. The rich might also benefit from not being involved in an arms race, which, on top of creating various poisons in the form of externalities, is stressful. And what's the point of being rich if it makes you stressed? So, we, thankfully, don't let our citizens die, which means that we can't rely on evolutionary or market forces to self-balance entirely. Thankfully, we have another mechanism, democracy, where we can vote for policies that redistribute wealth optimally and keep the system in balance. Policies like Andrew's Gilded Childhood and a universal basic income. This is not only good for economic productivity, but it also serves the well-being of the humans involved, which is the whole point of having a productive and sustainable economy in the first place.